You wake up and you're surrounded by boxes, cold metal walls. The world around you is silent aside from the gentle hum that seems to shake the very foundation of the room you find yourself confined in. It's familiar, but it feels cold, distant, as the light streams in from somewhere out of sight. With uneasy steps, you move forward.
Out of the moving van to start your Pokemon adventure. What I just described is what all the cool kids are calling a liminal space. Which, if you clicked on this video, you probably knew already, but for the 3 people that might not, Wikipedia defines these as an internet aesthetic portraying empty or abandoned places that appear eerie, forlorn, and often surreal. Liminal spaces are commonly places of transition or of nostalgic appeal. The idea of a transitional, spooky, dreamlike space that's disorienting and weird has been around for a long time, and used in media from books to comics to movies, video games, you name it. But something happened in 2019 that completely changed the game. The backrooms. Based on a single post on 4chan that contained an eerie image of a hallway and a simple yet engaging description, it just sent internet creators ablaze with passion to make art, and YouTubers ablaze with passion to make a lot of money on their next video. And man, I don't think I need to tell you that this idea took off. If you were on the internet, you could not escape the word liminal. Naturally, with something that blew up to this degree, the discussion would eventually move into the gamer sphere, as people started to create horror games about the backrooms, and those giant Burger King play places that I used to get trapped in as a kid. This bled into more classic games, and people would talk about how Mario 64's empty hallways gave them a nostalgic yet somewhat creeped out feeling, and how classic horror like Resident Evil and Silent Hill used silent, empty hallways to unnerve the player, thus creating a liminal space. More modern games like Bendy and the Ink Machine or Five Nights at Freddy used an initially comforting setting, only to twist it, empty it out, and make it unnerving, achieving an effect similar to how these images made people feel. These games were liminal. But what I noticed as this trend, was getting thrown around and applied to everything new and old, Grandma's house, liminal. Deck, liminal. Gym, was that almost every game that was being added to the list was 3D. 3D as in either a first-person game focused on exploration, or it was something that was more like Mario 64, where you control a little goober in an open 3D space with an X, Y, and Z axis. I would occasionally see 2D side-scrollers like Limbo or Echo the Dolphin on lists of liminal games, but these would be surrounded by recent Unity. More like Godot these days, am I right? Indie titles pushing towards the trend on one side, and old PS1 games that felt uneasy on the other. So I started to wonder, why? What exactly about the concept of liminality melds with 3D spaces over 2D ones, and what can a 2D game do to achieve the same feeling? So I decided to set out to find games, be it the whole game or just a particular section, that I would classify as 2D that also fits into the liminal space aesthetic. Now, the reason I say classify as 2D is because my definition of 2D encompasses top-down games, side-scrolling games, and isometric games. Basically, any game where you can explore an area, but it's not presented and you cannot explore it in 3 dimensions. Now, a quick disclaimer. What I bring up in this video is going to be different than what might achieve the aesthetic for other people, because the concept itself, the aesthetic, is based so much upon nostalgia and familiarity that what ticks that box is going to be different for everybody depending on where they grew up, how they grew up. So I'm mostly basing my findings upon the generally agreed aesthetic look as defined by Wikipedia, but obviously this video will also include examples that are nostalgic to me personally. Symphony of the Night is a game within the Castlevania series that was released on March 20th, 1997. The Metroidvania that defines Metroidvanias. It is A, one of my favorite games of all time, and B, oh baby, look at these backgrounds. Forgive that the footage is from the mobile version of the game. It's all I've got at the moment, and it's like $3. If you haven't played the game, it's right there. It's less than a Big Mac. It's a good game. You should buy it. It's a good game. Many of the rooms that you explore in Symphony are these grand hallways with tall, towering windows and speckled with furniture that gives a strange sense of lived-inness to the place. The backgrounds often span into the distance, leading your eyes back into deep, cavernous rooms, chapels, corridors. Places that look like there should be people. Castle staff, resident royalty, priests, but it's all empty. You know, aside from the monsters who are just vibing, just chilling. Let me just share some footage with you so you can see what I'm talking about. The library is the best example of this in the game, in my opinion. It is one of the most cozy feeling locations in the entire game, with these backgrounds that show you the classic massive archways, almost impossible collections of hallways and books, tables, and studies. But they're just sitting there, unused, empty. The only truly living thing in the library, aside from these friggin' weeds, this old crusty dude who sits in the back all creepy like. Thank you. I don't trust him. Zoo Tycoon. Zoo Tycoon is a zoo building simulator by Blue Fang Studios that released in 2001 on PC, and probably PlayStation or something, I don't know. I just know I played it on PC a lot, and I fed a lot of people to dinosaurs, and they probably didn't deserve it. They probably had families. I'm a bad man. Now, this one might just be me, but whenever I would play this game, I played on the free mode where you just had a ton of money, and I would start putting down attractions, fountains, animal pens, bathrooms. For some reason, I had a very weird fascination with the bathrooms in this game. I would put them down, and I would just stare at them and be like,
Yeah, that's where I want to be.
But anyway, I would block off the entrance of the park so that none of the guests could come in because it wasn't ready yet. You gotta stay outside. You're not gonna come into the park when it's not ready. Hey, what are you doing? Hey, we got a climber. Also, I couldn't actually play this game on my computer because it's too new, and this game can only run on frick potato. So I had to hit up Old Reliable. Just pretend this footage doesn't have any people in it. Ooh, they're ghosts. Spooky Halloween. So I would watch this empty space turn into an actual park with beautiful themed walkways, restaurants, and as I'd slowly bring it to life, one thing I remember that the game did was that you could hear the sounds of rides and attractions. And with the park having no people, because I locked them all outside, I'd zoom in and hear all the sounds of the imitation of life. Looping music from rides and food stands, burgers getting grilled, laser pew sounds from the arcade. But no people, no animals, just an empty park. Jerry at the burger stand doesn't count. He's not a real person. Eventually I had to let people in because, I guess they deserve it. And I'd start to see tiny little people walking around, kind of like little Lego guys, little Playmobil fellas. And it always left me with a weird sense of longing. I don't know. It's like these places felt almost like a distant memory. Like a day at the zoo with my parents. And it always made me want to just kind of be there. But you could only zoom in so far. You couldn't get down on a street level. So even though you made this place, you couldn't be there. You could only watch. Yume Nikki. Nikki? I don't speak Japanese. Yume Nikki is a game made by Kikiyama, released on June 26, 2004. In it, you play as a young woman who doesn't want to leave her apartment and would instead rather just explore her own dreams.
Nope, not getting out of this
Bed. During the majority of your playtime, the game keeps you within the realm of dreamlike absurdity, all sorts of shapes and colors thrown about wildly in ways that don't really make any logical sense. So when the game does throw you into something more familiar, like a nighttime roadside or military barracks, it doesn't feel right. Every time I saw something more familiar to my own life, it made me feel very uneasy, like something not good was gonna happen.
Hey kid, you wanna buy some beans?
Playing the game for any length of time, it really does start to feel like a dream. As the player, you kind of start to treat it as such. You start to see the same things over and over and try the most nonsensical solutions to see if you can get anything to happen. It's designed with looping maps and confusing surreal landscapes mixed with mundanity. Its often droning soundtrack. It all lends itself to a feeling of, this isn't a place that I'm supposed to be. These attributes make it right at home within the dreamcore style of Liminality. With their strange structures, nonsensical landscapes, things that are completely unknown to you and yet somehow feel oddly familiar. Not to mention the whole theme of the game being dreams, which are in and of themselves kind of a liminal space between the and the. Life Tastes Like Cardboard is an indie game created by solo developer Demensa and released on September 22nd, 2019. In the game, you follow John going through his daily life. He wakes up, goes to class, and goes to bed. Wakes up, goes to class, and goes to bed. Wakes up, class, goes to bed. Wakes up, class. This game is A, also one of my favorite games of all time, and B, one of the most emotionally devastating games that I have ever played in my life, and the aesthetic wears that on its freaking sleeve. You walk along dreary, hand-drawn streets, repeating the same monotonous tasks over and over as it starts to feel like the entire world that John lives in is just one big hallway, doing the same things over and over and over. The world around him, people, places, things eventually begin to blend, textures and people from one place melding into another as his entire life becomes an endless nothing, transitioning from moment to moment without any meaning, never-ending melancholy of hallways and places that don't feel like home, until eventually you're not even sure if where you are is real anymore. This one hits the liminal vibe in a very traditional sense, with both its nightmarish and dreamy landscapes styled like rough, almost childish drawings that pull the player into a sense of uneasy nostalgia, but also in a more personal one. If you've ever dealt with depression and just sort of felt like your entire life is one big transition with no end point in sight, where you aren't actually moving towards anything, sometimes lasting for months or years, I feel like this one will resonate with you. And to be honest, that's all I'm going to say about this one for now. I really could go on, but I'll leave it there. It's so good, and I don't want to spoil it. It's one of the most impactful games I have ever played. I've drawn fan art of it. It's criminally underrated. I have a whole ass video focusing entirely on that game that I'm planning on making sometime in the future. Please, if you're in the mental space to deal with a game that will absolutely gut punch your soul, please give it a try. Also, the music in this segment is entirely, it's in the game. It's made by Demensa. It's fantastic. Undertale. Do I even need to tell you? I mean, I feel like the audience crossover between people who have played Undertale and the 10 people who might watch this, it's a circle. Whatever. Undertale is an indie game created by Toby Fox, funded via Kickstarter and released in 2015. In it, you play as a human who has fallen into the underground, a spooky, but not really, place full of monsters. Undertale jumps effortlessly between two styles that I often see associated with liminal spaces. On one end, you have the cozy, nostalgic homescapes. Grandma's house with the crackling fire, the familiar bar back in your hometown, the cozy hotel lobby cast in gentle yellow light that fills you with a warm feeling like you're back visiting your grandparents for a week. To the classic long hallways that fill you with dread and, oh god, I don't know if I'm alone in here, help! Do I need to spoiler warning a game that's this well known? Whatever, who cares? Minor spoilers ahead. The story of Undertale has a, albeit not traditional in the liminal space sort of sense, but a sense of being stuck in the in-between. The story revolving around a human stuck in a world where they don't belong, and the monsters feeling trapped in the underground, just waiting for Asgore to make his move. In the meantime, simply trying their best to be content with the world they've been put into. The game, near its conclusion, visually plays with the concept of nostalgia, showing you barren, empty versions of places that you visited at the beginning, filling the player with a sense of longing for the simplicity of how their adventure started, the friends they made along the way, and how their next steps will determine the fate of not just themselves, but the world around them. Obviously, I think that the liminal feeling of this game is enhanced when there are no NPCs present, as loneliness and a sense of isolation are like huge points for the liminal space aesthetic, but the only way to achieve that is and I am a good boy, and I won't be doing that because these are my friends and I love them. In my opinion, this is one of the game's huge strengths in regard to the subject of this video. If you decide to go that route, the entire game becomes empty. A place that was previously full of life, of people who you could talk to and engage with, who had their own lives and stories, now just a husk. Each location now only existing as a space to travel through, to get to your next victim. I'm realizing that this entire video, it's so absurdly niche, and it's basically just me attempting to justify a random thought I had in the shower. But, I'm too far into it to stop now. You know what else can't stop? The sponsor for today's video. It's trucks. They sent me another tape, and just says trucks, like scribbled on the front, trucks. Actually, they told me not to watch these, to just, like when I'm editing, I have to put them in, but I have to skip over them. I can't actually watch them. It's like the same guy, like company. I don't really know. They just sort of. They sent me the money and the tape, and then, anyway, here we go.
There's only one way to conquer the great outdoors. The American way. Introducing the new Raptor F-150 with 4-wheel drive and adjustable mirrors. When you feel the dirt crunching beneath your tires, you'll wonder how you ever lived without it. You too can conquer the great outdoors and drive away from all those pesky problems. You won't have time to consider the mistakes that you've made, to consider the things you regret. It doesn't matter how much you feel like you might have wasted, because now that you have this truck, you've succeeded. And now you can just drive. You just keep on driving. You drive until the tires are worn and rugged, until the chassis is covered in dirt and grime. Your phone stopped ringing weeks ago, but you keep on driving. Something pushing you forward. Was it worth it? Was it worth all the hurt that you caused? Did your choices cost. For only 16 payments of $25.99.99. Raptor F-150. Tough.
Night in the Woods is a 2017 game developed by Infinite Fall and published by Finji. In it you play as a young woman named May Borowski, who has just returned to her hometown rather suddenly from college. And it is a game that's just... the whole game is about these liminal themes, man. The game takes place during fall. May, as a character, is someone who has just come back from college unexpectedly and still isn't comfortable sharing the why with her friends and family, and is stuck in a cycle of just not knowing what to do with her life, while her friends and everyone else around her all seem to chug forward in one direction or another, while she's stuck holding on to a place and people that don't exist the way she remembered, that has moved forward while she has not.
Oh, and the
Art style, these backgrounds, these areas, all rendered by Scott Benson in this simplistic yet beautiful style with an amazing use of colors. The backgrounds alone, I think, hit the vibe of like a fall-time, small-town liminal space on their own. And when you encounter the moments in-game where you are alone, where there is nobody else present, and the sense of casual stagnation of this place, of this town, starts to creep up on you. Until you walk into the next room and see Mama and Papa waiting in the loneliness, crashes to the floor as Mama and Papa give you a little kiss on the cheek. To me, this game emulates the liminality that is being a young adult living in a small town. Empty parking lots at old grocery stores that closed down and were never turned into anything. The bridge, visiting old fields with May's mom. All these little moments just perfectly evoke a moody, somber sort of nostalgia for those quiet, simple moments that come and go that we wish we could hold on to. On certain nights, the game will cast May into a dream, with buildings that seem to materialize out of thin air, power lines that stray upwards at impossible angles, seeming to connect to floating poles. But aside from these sequences, Night in the Woods liminality is not in your face. It's not bombastic. It's somber and quiet, but it's always there, like the slow march of time. Zelda's Adventure was released on the Philips CDI back on June 5th, 1994, developed by the Virtus Corporation and published by Philips. In this game, also, fricking sucks. So I know this is a weird choice, I know. This game is nobody's definition of a classic, or even so much as somewhat playable. But there's something about these graphics, about these pixelated photograph-looking textures, landscapes that are just... they're so crusty, and I can barely tell what's going on. It's like those memes that you gotta squint at to make out the picture, but I don't know, man. There's something there. Something about the generic cheesy fantasy setting. The fact that half the time there's no soundtrack. It's just wind. You just hear the wind. Like you're at the beach on a weekday. And when it's not wind, it's like 3 notes on repeat.
Listen to this.
And it makes me really uncomfortable. A lot of the shots that they use for buildings and structures are like weird. Like they cut off at strange points. They span into the foreground in really wonky ways that don't feel right. But like, it's because of this crustiness. The frankly ugly visuals paired with the generic yet somehow detailed fantasy setting that to me makes it an enticing yet uncomfortable atmosphere that just, I want to jump right in there and I want to be in this crusty world for a little bit. It just draws me right in. Does this even classify as liminal, or is it just like uncanny? I don't know at this point. This script is getting all over. Pokemon. Oh, you thought I was gonna skip this one? I used it in the intro, you big dummy. Pokemon is... I don't need to tell you that. I don't need to tell you what Pokemon is. You know what Pokemon is. You could be a 90-year-old man and you still know who this little frick is.
Billy, is that you, Billy? Billy, my sweet
Obese boy. Whatever. First Pokemon games came out in 1995. Pokemon Red and Blue. The OG DLC. You want all the Pokemon? You gotta buy both games, kid. I played a good bit of Pokemon games back in the day. Not so much anymore since they went, like this. But back on the old GBA and DS, those were my jam. I'm talking Emerald, Soul Silver, Diamond and Pearl. And for the most part, they're just fun little haha kids games. But there were little moments within them. Silphco. The opening room, when you walk in and there's nothing. There's no people, no couches, just tile floors, potted plants. Did I say there was no couches? There's couches. I used to play these games with the music off at night as a kid. And I think that might be why this particular area spooked me the way it did. Because the actual music that's playing in this section, it's not exactly unnerving. Kind of a bop, to be honest. But there were other areas, like the back half of the abandoned ship in Ruby and Sapphire after you dive into the water. The old chateau in Pokemon Diamond and Pearl. These old abandoned locations filled with decay where there were few other human NPCs, if any. Both with a plethora of empty rooms, tight hallways. And the old chateau even has a ghost or two. Ooh, spooky. Now, obviously, these ones were intended to be spooky in like a traditional haunted house sort of sense. But to me, they still hit that note of being in a place in between familiar and uneasy. Because in Pokemon games, we've been to manors, we've been on boats, so taking these places and twisting them into something less inviting, especially in a game as kid-friendly as Pokemon, I still think it fits the bill. So what do I think makes these particular examples work? I think there are two primary factors that can really help a 2D game achieve the same feeling as a spooky liminal space source engine map. The first one is vibes. Graphics, music, themes, that sort of stuff. Games like Yume Nikki and Life Tastes Like Cardboard achieve the isolated and alone, familiar yet foreboding sense of liminal through their art direction, soundtracks, and wide open explorable spaces that mimic places we might be familiar with, but twisting them into something strange and abnormal. Games like Undertale and Night in the Woods create atmospheres that are cozy, familiar at times, filled with characters that are fun and believable. That allows those moments of silence, of quiet and desertedness to stand out. The isolated rundown grocery store in Night in the Woods, or the long hallways leading up to major events in Undertale. Because these locations exist within games that we know are alive, are places with people and history and activity, these empty yet familiar locations stand out and can make us uneasy. And then you have Pokemon, Zoo Tycoon, Symphony of the Night, Zelda's Adventure. It's more specific, isolated, perhaps even unintentional areas that achieve that feeling. The empty zoo with sounds of arcades and music. Silphco's opening room, previously filled with people, now silent and empty. A poorly rendered pixelated town with only the sound of the wind gusting by, standing in the library after all the enemies have been slain and staring into the background. Moments like this within these games are simply that, they're moments, easy to pass by and miss during the general gameplay loop. To me, they only become liminal when I stop to sit and observe them, much like liminal space photographs force us to do by holding on to these little in-between places that we don't usually focus on. The second primary aspect is visual presentation. What are we as players allowed to see? The visual cue of something in the distance plays a major part in what makes a liminal space feel the way it does. The angle from which most liminal space images are shown has a feeling of separation to it. Separation between the photographer and the subject. It creates a sense of being out of reach. Some camera presentations allow this more so than others when it comes to 2D games. Side-scrolling games like Symphony of the Night and Night in the Woods can show us things off in the distance through their backgrounds, things that are unreachable but enticing. They can create structures from an angle that is familiar, but twisted into the uncanny or the wondrous. The library's twisting, seemingly infinite halls of books in Symphony of the Night, or the dreamscapes of Night in the Woods, where the buildings of the town become shadowy, twisting in ways that shouldn't be possible. I think the popularity of things like Sonic.exe or the Godzilla NES creepypasta speak to that, to the ease with which the side-scroller can be tuned into something creepy or uncanny, or familiar and nostalgic, or in the case of what we're looking for, liminal. Isometric games have the ability to show off more of the third dimension and lend themselves well to specific places, a particular part of a coastline, a cozy little shop, or hazily lit cityscapes with neon signs, or a small section of a zoo. However, these are generally confined to smaller, more compact spaces because of the camera limitations, not allowing for vast sweeping shots like a side-scroller could show. And then you have top-down. You may have noticed that all the top-down games that I mentioned in this video use angled top-down, a style in which you can still see the front of things like houses and people. I think this style of presentation felt more liminal to me because games like GTA 2 and Hotline Miami that are truly top-down, they kind of look like floor plans that you might see advertising in an apartment building or something. Those games are stuck at a camera angle that does not allow the parts of objects that we're most familiar with to be seen. No fronts of shops or the side view of a stairway, no windows. Basically, we can't see things' faces. But the angled top-down, such as Life Tastes Like Cardboard or Undertale, can use that 3/4 view to show us those faces, hitting us with familiarity, and twist and form these spaces into monuments to the uncanny or the empty. It allows for spaces devoid of people, like the Silphco building, to really hit that this place is empty and that's uncomfortable feeling, because we're allowed to see the things that make the space feel lived in, that make it feel familiar. So basically, 2D games can achieve liminality by generally following the same rules that you would with 3D, but keeping in mind the limitations of their 2D presentation. It's a much less exciting conclusion than I was hoping to come to. To close, I thought it would be fun to take the things here that I learned about liminality in 2D spaces and try making my own. And this is what I came up with. Clearly inspired by the library from Symphony of the Night, because that one's the most nostalgic for me personally. But yeah, that's pretty much all I gotta say about that. I hope you enjoyed it. If you liked the video, consider hitting subscribe, checking out some of the other stuff that I've made. I'm still pretty new to this. I'm still figuring it all out, so every little bit of support means a ton. And engagement bait question. What are some games that you think are 2D liminal spaces? Whoa, I fricked it up. Oh god. What's good? How you doing? You having a good time?